So what do I put into a trust? Well, initially, when I create this living trust, I'm going to move everything I own into it with one key exception. And that key exception is retirement plans. IRAs and retirement plans cannot be owned by your living trust. Now, the trust might be a beneficiary of that IRA or retirement plan, and we'll talk a little bit about why that may make sense to do. But that IRA and retirement plan is never going to be owned by the living trust. But everything else you own, and as soon as I say that, of course, I create one more exception. I typically don't put the family car into a living trust. I can, and there's no real reason not to, other than the hassle of going down to the Department of Motor Vehicles and standing in line for 3 hours. But I could do that. I could put my car into a living trust. And if I was Jay Leno and I owned all kinds of collector vehicles worth millions of dollars, then I would put those vehicles into my living trust. But my typical ordinary day-to-day car, I don't have to worry about putting that into my trust while I'm alive. You know, there's ways that we can get that into a trust after death without going through a probate. But everything else I own, brokerage accounts, bank accounts, life insurance, annuities, whatever it is I have, I want to make sure it gets into that living trust. Because the trust only controls what it owns, right? And if I've got assets that are not in my trust at death, the trust has no effect over those assets, and I risk the need for having my estate to go through probate to get those assets into the trust after my death. This line item about transfers by agent, I want to talk just for a second about that one. What we're talking about there is when you have an estate plan in place, right, and you've got your trust, there are also certain ancillary documents you typically are going to have in place. Powers of attorney, right? General powers of attorney to deal with financial considerations if I become incapacitated. Medical powers of attorney to deal with medical decisions if I cannot make my own. Well, one of the things, you know, if you have those powers of attorney in place, you want to double check, is that your agent has the power to move assets into your living trust, just in case you become incapacitated before you've had a chance to do that yourself, or if you've missed anything, right, while not incapacitated, moving it into your trust, you'd want to make sure that your agent under your power of attorney has that ability, just in case you can't do it, and they can then do that after your incapacity and make sure your trust is fully funded, that everything's in there. And then, of course, we have these post-mortem transfers into trust, right? Things like the death benefit of life insurance. I'm not going to be able to move that into my trust while I'm alive. I might move the ownership of the life insurance policy into my trust, and I'm definitely going to make my trust the beneficiary of that life insurance. But that's not going to fund into my trust until my death. My pour-over will, that's another way after death I can get assets into my trust. I have a last will and testament in place when I have a living trust that says my trust is the only beneficiary of my estate. Right? The problem of relying on that last will and testament to move assets into my trust, of course, is that will has to go through probate to get those assets then into the trust after my death. So while we have that in place as a backup, we certainly do not want to rely on our will to move assets into our trust after death. We want to do that while we're alive.